everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Game Changer, and it is day 8 of the 12 days of bookings. Holy cow, I mean, geez Louise, I never thought I would be making it this far. My God, just, wow, 8 days, which means that there's only about 4 more after this one. And guys, for this booking, I thought to myself, well, what if I took something that has not yet been created per se? What if I took something that really hasn't been turned into a remake, is still kind of a classic movie, a classic video you might say, and just turn it into kind of like a full-length actual movie? And I thought to myself, well, what movies could really do that? Well, it is the holiday season, so I thought to myself, what if I actually did a movie that really is a true instant classic and could probably use the update that it deserves and use that kind of, different kind of remake that it truly deserves. So I thought to myself, what if I took a classic from my childhood and turned it to a full-length movie? And the movie that I'm referring to is Frosty the Snowman. Now, for a lot of people that might say that Frosty may have had a remake, well, to be honest, he's only, I think, had a sequel, to be fair. And that sequel is not exactly one of my favorites. So doing an actual remake and creating it into a full-length movie might actually make it into something very interesting, to say the least. So, yeah, I'm going to try to take the Frosty the Snowman and I'm going to create it into a full-length movie. I think it'll actually be very fun. I do apologize if I get distracted. Sometimes I have 2 very cute and adorable dogs that are just loving attention. So if I get distracted, that's one of the reasons why. But let's not waste any time. With that being said, let's talk about Frosty the Snowman. So what exactly is Frosty the Snowman? A lot of people know the song of Frosty the Snowman was a happy, jolly soul, corn-cut pipe and a button nose and 2 eyes made out of coal. He came to life because of a magic hat, and it's one of those songs that's very memorable. And then they made it into a movie which still holds up as one of my favorites to this day as far as Christmas, themed deals. So it is one of those movies that definitely deserves to have a little bit more development, a little more creativeness to it. So how would I create this movie? How would I create this? Well, here's how I would do it. So obviously, we definitely would need to keep the narrator involved in this. We would definitely want him popping in every now and then, talking about the story and just keeping everything kind of interesting. So I'm still having a hard time really thinking about who the narrator would be played by. I would probably have somebody who would be definitely just absolutely really good. It might be interesting to have James Earl Jones play that role of a narrator per se. Some people might disagree with me because they might not see him as the holiday. I'm going to go with James Earl Jones. I'm sorry, but I just think that he would be really good, and he would definitely be one of those voices that would just captivate the Christmas spirit. So he basically goes on to talk about how Christmas time is not about the horrible times, about everything that crazy that goes on. It's one of those holidays that brings people together, and while the madness ends, the love and the time that they spend together, that families spend together, can really truly begin. Enemies become friends for this time of year, just doing stuff like that. And of course, it pans over into the schoolyard and into the school where the kids are there. They're watching the first snow of the year come down, and they are just in awe. They are just really looking at the beauty and the majesty of it. Teacher, of course, tells them to get back to their seats, and they bring in a magician. I believe the magician's name is Professor Hinkle, I think was his name. And I was trying to think to myself, who could I actually have play this role? And I'm not going to have like a confirmed role for like every single person, but some people that I actually think would really excel at some of these roles, I really do think would work. And also, I will say this, that I would not have it as a live action. I would keep it as a full-on animated deal, just because I think that live action would just be way, way too far out there. So having it as a full-on animated movie would be great. Who would voice the character of this magician? Well, I would have Jim Carrey do it. He definitely has kind of like the kind of would have the look. He would kind of have the characteristics that they would need for this to work. And of course, the magician, he's just the worst. I mean, you definitely see that during this time. He's doing random deals, like, making any kind of magic trick that you would think would be easy. He finds a way to even screw that up. I would have him do maybe try 5 tricks before getting into more depth of the story. Maybe having 2 eggs in a hat, and he's thinking, oh, I'm going to make 2 birds appear, and then nope, just 2 eggs just plop out of the hat. He even screws up something like the handkerchief deal, like maybe it gets caught in his tie, or it just doesn't work out as well. Maybe he only gets 1 ribbon, and he's just like, oh, whoops. Just kind of stuff like that, where you're kind of looking at this wow, this guy is just the worst. And then finally he gets to the ever classic, oh, I'm going to pull a rabbit out of the hat. Well, the rabbit's not coming out that much. So he just finally reaches a point where he's like, the only thing this hat is worth for is to be along in the trash can. Tosses it, of course, lands, hits the ground, rabbit appears, and the hat goes back on the rabbit. He just hops away. The magician's trying to chase him. Kids are laughing. Then the kids are running outside to, enjoy the snow, and you see them enjoy the snow. Not like one of those situations where it's like, oh, well, we hate the snow, like in Frosty 2. Oh my God, that is one of those things that still irks me to this day. But yeah, they're doing snowball fights. They're making snow forts, going sledding, just having a lot of fun, and then it evolves into creating a snowman. Honestly, one of the perfect snowmen that you would actually see. And then they decide, oh, what are we going to call this snowman? I mean, can we call him... And they come up with a bunch of random names, maybe Snowball. It's like, Snowball? That seems a little redundant. There's these smart kids that come up with the name of Christopher Columbus, or even Booker T. Huffman or something like that. Just these silly names. And there's always this one kid out there that is just going to be so far out there, but you still find enough reason to find them just entertaining. I would still keep this in there where this random kid just goes, well, let's see, he's kind of white and kind of looks good and blah, blah, blah. Oatmeal! And of course the kids all look at him like, oatmeal? And it's not one of those things where they kind of brush off. It's just one of those things where, it's just kind of like, it's a good name, just not, I don't think it'd be pretty. And of course, Karen, the main character, comes up with the name of Frosty, and of course this is where we get the name of Frosty the Snowman. A magician runs out after the hat because Hocus Pocus the bunny is still hopping away with it. That he catches the bunny, but the hat hits Frosty in the head. We get a brief glimpse of him, coming to life, and it's kind of one of those situations where they're just all in shock, like, oh my gosh, he came to life. It must be a magic hat. And as soon as the magician hears this, he's like, what? Say that again? Say again? And then he just grabs the hat right off Frosty's head and says, if it's that powerful, I want it back. And of course the kids are just trying to say, well, you didn't want it anyway, you threw it away. But as soon as the magician finds out that, hey, this hat is more magical than ever, it's going to make him a millionaire. It's going to make him very rich. And he basically denies, oh, there was no way that the snowman came to life. You kids are just using your imagination and blah, blah, blah. So the magician walks off, and the kids, they're of course just saying, we knew what we saw. Frosty came to life. And the magician, he's walking through the city. He's having a carefree in the world because he's thinking, with this hat, I am going to be, completely rich. I'm going to have a great time, blah, 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 blah. Hocus Pocus jumps off of his head without him knowing, and rushes away from the hat. And by this time, it's about nightfall. Hocus Pocus returns to the schoolyard, sees that there's really nobody around. So he's kind of thinking, well, how am I going to return this hat? He's not talking. This is just kind of one of those things where it's more the motions are, the motions are kind of explaining everything. So, of course, Hocus Pocus sees the snowman still standing there, and he kind of looks at it. Then he looks at the hat, looks at the snowman again, and he's just like, all right. So throws the hat right on top of Frosty, And we get a little more of a deal. Like, the first time, he comes to life, it's just a quick boom. Just kind of appears, that's it. But for this one, it kind of gets a little more magical. It gets a little more whimsical. Because at first, Hocus Pocus puts on, and it's just kind of like, nothing happened. Maybe it was just nothing. So he kind of walks away. But then we get the whole deal. Almost like the Jack Frost deal with, Michael Keaton. Yes, I know there are a lot of people that are questioning why I'm using that reference. But just kind of like a magical moment like that. Maybe not as extravagant, but just kind of one of those deals where does feel magical. So Frosty comes to life, of course saying, "Happy birthday." Hey, I've said my first word. And, talking about how snowmen can't really talk, and he's just kind of having this little conversation with Hocus Pocus about how, I must be, if I'm alive, then I must be able to walk, I must be able to sweep, I must be able to juggle, count to 10. Just think about, wow, this is really wonderful. So, what an incredible moment here. And, the day after, Karen comes back, the kids come back, and they still see Frosty. Frosty kind of just stays there a little bit, and they slowly start to realize that Frosty has indeed come to life. And this is how I kind of break it up, is that the first half hour I would have, the origins, basically going through a little more in-depth deal, and even just getting into like the crazy antics that the kids can have with Frosty, having more fun with these building of snow forts and, going sledding, doing stuff like that. And, the second half will be the second act, basically, for their journey, and the third act will be the final climax, basically. So, for this first half hour, we're basically just letting the storyline kind of develop. We're kind of getting a little idea of, which characters are which, and if they're going to serve an importance, if they're going to be kind of, there, everything like that. But we're mainly focusing on one main character, Karen, and she has a bit of an interesting backstory, and it really revolves around the fact that her parents are, are basically on the finalizations of getting a divorce, and she is kind of having these conflicting, emotions, like a lot of kids who have experienced divorce have, of, whether these, whether the parents are going to, love her or not, even though they don't love each other anymore. So we kind of put that in the back of your mind for right now. So we get through like the first half hour. We have all these great moments. We get into another scene where Karen's watching TV and the weatherman's talking about, hey, we're going to be experiencing some warm weather within the next little while. And, she comes back to schoolyard. Frosty's there, and he's just kind of like, well, I just feel kind of funny. I feel a little melty. I feel kind of sweaty. And Karen, of course, says, well, unfortunately, snow melts, and we can't, have you melting. And Frosty's like, well, what are we going to do? Now, I think that when in the first movie they kind of just had everything kind of, like, I don't know if they would say fall into place in a weird kind of way, but this is now kind of the point where we can kind of develop a little bit more of these characters. So Frosty, he doesn't know too much of everything, but, Karen can basically explain, well, if you're in the warmth, if you're in the sun, you're going to start melting, and if you start melting, then you become, a bit of a puddle. And Frosty said, like, well, we can't have that. I mean, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Karen makes the idea of, well, we're going to have to send you somewhere to keep you frozen. We have to find some place that would, keep you, cold and keep you alive for so long. And a lot of kids are thinking, well, maybe we could put them in the freezer. And it's like, no, that's not going to work. He talked about, maybe there's like an ice freezer in town that they could do, but that doesn't work either. Then one kid finally comes up with the idea, well, if we take him to a place that's actually really cold all year round, then he can survive. And one of the main places that they could think about is the North Pole. They would suggest the South Pole, but they're in North America, so this is kind of why this seems a little bit easier. So basically, we have them suggesting that they go to the North Pole, and there's some people that think, well, maybe we can go on a plane to North Pole, and it's like, no, that's not going to work, because it's really warm in there, there's no way that this will work. And then one kid says, hey, there's that old train that usually goes up north, and, it would probably have like a nice ice deal to, keep Frosty cold all the way there. So they build off that. They go to the train station where they try to purchase a ticket, and the ticket guy is, of course, doing all these charges and saying, okay, let's see here. Okay, so that's going to be $3,000.97, including tax. And Karen and the kids are like, well, we don't exactly have the money. And the guy's like, okay, well, goodbye. Kind of closes the shutter. And this kind of devastates Frosty and Karen, where they're just like, well, what are we going to do now? There's no way that we can do this. And we kind of do build up the relationship a bit more with Frosty and Karen. You really feel the kind of friendship starting to slowly bond there. And it's one of those things where Karen actually starts showing a little bit of weakness, but not to the point where she goes all full on, like, crying. But she kind of, talks about how it really stings to think that, this holiday season, there's just so many bad things happening. She mentions, her family's going through a tough time, but she doesn't mention the divorce. She just says, my family's going through some tough times right now, and now I'm going to probably lose somebody who's very close to me. And it's kind of one of those moments where the guy who tried to take he kind of listens in on this. And you remember that scene from Wizard of Oz where the gatekeeper kind of listens in and it kind of hits him? This is kind of like one of those same moments there where he's hearing this and he's just looking over. Maybe he's got like a picture of somebody in his family or something that makes it like a relatable deal where he realizes that, that maybe this is too much. So he just says, okay, look, here's what we'll do. You take your snowman to the icebox. He can stay there. I won't charge a ticket for him. For you, this is on me. This is on me. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, it really shows the kind of compassion and heart that people can have. So he finds a way to make it that, she paid the ticket already. Maybe it's from like his own savings or maybe something like that. And he eventually gets the ticket to them. So they're heading on the train. They're heading towards the North Pole. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, they're being stalked by the magician, who is trying to think of ways to make sure that he's trying to get the hat back, basically. And you see a lot of the wacky antics. Maybe he tries to take him out with a snowball or something like that. Just trying to really, he's just really trying to, get this hat and really become the greatest magician in his mind. So we have that going on to counterbalance all the main story that's going on here. So Karen is in the train. She's staying warm. She's staying good. But she checks every now and then on Frosty to see to it that, Frosty's doing good. And Frosty's just having the time of his life in the little ice box that they have. He even has a deal where, he takes off some of the ice shavings that are on some of these ice blocks here, and he's turning them like into snow cones, because there's another snowman by the name of Snowden who that was like his, he was always just eating snow cones. So I thought to myself, let's kind of incorporate that. Let's kind of incorporate the fact that, Frosty can still eat, but, he just eats the snow cone. So it's kind of a callback to where some people might see that reference. But then things kind of go awry when the magician said, well, if he can't make it to the North Pole, then I can get the hat really easily. So he unhooks the trailer that has the freezer deal. Karen finds out about this, fast enough to where she jumps on and she's with Frosty. The train's still going, and they end up in the middle of nowhere, maybe somewhere in like Iceland or something like that. But they really realize that they're going into a separate track, and they realize, okay, they're going to have to try and walk the rest of the way there. So they're walking. Frosty's doing fine. Hocus Pocus, he's along with the ride too, and he's doing okay. He's still kind of shivering just a bit, but it's still enough to keep him warm because of his fur. Unfortunately, though, Karen does not have the she doesn't have the warmth of an extra coat or something like that. Frosty gives her his scarf to try and help out a little bit, but Hocus and Frosty both realize, well, unfortunately, we have to find a way to get Karen warmer if she's a goner, and the only way to do that is to create fire. And unfortunately, Frosty doesn't know how to do that, and neither does Hocus Pocus. So they keep walking for a little while. Frosty ends up, carrying Karen through the snowstorm that they're enduring. The magician, he's luckily able to have like, heat pads and stuff like that to keep him warm. And then we reach a nice little forest area where they see like twinkling of ornaments and the Christmas lights and stuff like that, where they just basically see a lot of these Christmas decorations, and it's kind of like, well, this is kind of interesting. And look, and they see all these little woodland creatures, owls, squirrels, deer, stuff like that, where they just, they're in the festive holiday season. It seems kind of unlikely, but, it's an animated feature. There are crazier things that have happened. So Frosty tries to talk to them, but they get skittish and they run off. And there's like, what was it? Something that I said? And Hocus is kind of standing there with his arms up, like, I don't know. And Frosty says, Hocus, maybe you could talk to them because you're an animal. Maybe you can talk to them and see if they'll make a fire for Kevin, or if even they know how to make one. And Hocus comes up to these animals that are just hiding from Frosty. And Hocus is basically explaining, kind of like in what am I looking for? A charade-like deal, where he's basically explaining the whole story, and then he explains that Karen needs a fire to keep warm. The animals are kind of hesitant, but they also think, okay, you know what? Sure, we'll help out. So, and we have one of those situations where they do create a fire, but it's not like they turn to people and stuff like that. No, they're like animals, basically trying to make a fire. There are, birds that are dropping down sticks. There are deer finding other items that would help create this fire. Some of the squirrels are able to, create a spark and start the fire, get it warm, get it nice and going. They have a nice little spot for Karen to stay so that she can warm up and so she can, be totally fine. It's like a little cave area. Frosty, unfortunately, has to get away from that because he's worried about melting. So, while this is all happening, Hocus and Frosty are, talking. Well, here's the thing: we have a bit of a situation here where we're trying to figure out a way to get me to the North Pole before I melt, but we also need to find a way to get Karen home because there's no way that she's going to make it all the way to the North Pole in this condition. So, they try to think of ideas. Well, maybe we could, I wish if only there was a way that we could fly or we could do something like that. They're coming up with ideas like, maybe we could call in the Marines, maybe we can call in the President, maybe we can call in, maybe like some references that people might get as like a joke. But then it eventually comes up to the idea that, we need to find a way to get to Santa Claus. So Frosty tells Hocus, hey, why don't you go find, why don't you go try to find Santa Claus, and then you bring him back here so that way we can get him home. And Hocus, he's warmed up, he's good. He goes off, and he is trying his hardest to figure out where Santa Claus is. While this is happening, we see Frosty and Karen kind of develop a little bit more on their friendship. So Karen and Frosty have this nice conversation where Frosty just says, well, Hocus is going to go find Santa Claus, so hopefully he can bring him back so that way, I can get to the North Pole. And then that way, we can get you home to your family, because I'm sure your parents are worried. And this is kind of one of those deals where Karen kind of breaks down, and she's saying, I wouldn't be too sure about that. I don't even know if they even care about me. And she starts, basically breaking down and talking about how her parents are going through a tough time, and how they just don't seem to love each other, and I'm guessing that they're not going to love me as much. So, this is kind of those things where we kind of build the bond between Frosty and Karen, and we built up the friendship between the two of them to where, Frosty is almost like family to Karen, and there's a reason why for that if you know the story. So we have that deal, and then there's a situation where, they bring up a conversation. Karen, some reason, has like this nasally voice of like, well, I just think you should give up your hat, Frosty. And Frosty's just like, give up my hat? Why on earth would I? Turns around and he sees that the magician has Karen captive, and he's trying to save Karen, but also the fire is right there, so he can't get too far. So we have a nice little deal where it's kind of like a Mexican standoff between the two of them, and it ends with the magician saying, give me that hat or else. Frosty just goes, Or else? What? And it's kind of one of those funny moments where, it's like a hollow threat where he just, where he basically just doesn't have anything, where he's just like, well, don't ask questions where you don't want to know the answer to. And he tries to charge after Frosty, and this gives them the chance to escape. Frosty tells Karen to get on him, and they kind of ride off down a hill because Frosty's made of snow, and he is almost like a really fast toboggan. And, the magician, he tries, but he sees how fast Frosty's going, and he's just like, oh, I better get that hat. It's the last thing I do. So they get away from the magician, but they end up at a greenhouse, and Karen is still a little bit shivering. And Frosty just says, well, let's just get you in here and keep you warmed up for the time being. And hopefully by then you should be warmed up and ready to go. And Karen worries, like, well, you're going to melt, though. And Frosty's like, oh, just for a little bit. I'm just going to make sure that you're in there, that everything is good, and that, you're going to be fine. So Frosty gets Karen in there, and, Frosty realizes from the heat that, if he stayed in there for a long period of time, for even like a short period of time, he probably is going to be all wishy-washy. Now he's about to leave. The door suddenly slams. They try to open the door, but it's locked. On the outside, we see the magician, lock him in, and he reveals the plan of, like, I got you now, and when you are all melted down into a puddle, that hat will finally be mine. A little laugh like that. So we then have another heartfelt moment with Frosty and with Karen, where Frosty talks about how it's good that he knows that Karen is going to be all right. You're going to be warm, and Karen is just devastated at this point. It's like, but you're going to melt. I don't want to lose you. And Frosty reassures her that you're never going to lose me, and you also have to remember that your family is going to love you no matter what. It's kind of one of those heartfelt deals, kind of like where Olaf was talking to Anna during Frozen, where it's kind of one of those situations where Frosty makes it that some people are worth melting for. Just kind of one of those moments there. We see then hear a bit of jingles, and here's a sleigh shadow above the greenhouse. We see it land close by there. We see Hocus Pocus getting out, and out comes, you guessed it, good old Saint Nick, Santa Claus. He comes out, and they see the doors are barricaded. They're able to get it off. They open the door. They go in. But as soon as they reach there, they realize that it's too late. All that's left is just a puddle and a hat. Karen is just sobbing. She is devastated at this. And it's kind of one of those situations where this is something that would really kind of hit on it, because you're really hoping that they make it and that they do find a way to make sure that they can get Frosty out. But again, they realize that they are too late. And this is where Santa breaks the fourth wall, where he just talks about, too late? Why, nonsense. And he has that speech during the original where he talks about how Frosty's made of Christmas snow and that, it is never gone. It's a really good monologue. I would keep that in this entire deal. They are able to find a way to reconstruct Frosty. They're able to find a way to get him back to what he was before. Hocus has got the hat, but then he gets grabbed by the magician, and the hat gets flung right into Karen. She's holding it away from the magician, who just says, I want that hat back, and I want it now. And Santa's just saying, don't you dare touch that hat. And the magician, of course, is just like, who the heck are you? And just like, oh, you look like Santa Claus, but there's no way that you are. It's like, oh, really? Would the real Santa know that you asked for that hat last year? It's like, I told everybody I wanted that hat last year. That's a convenience deal. Then he goes to this list of deals where he basically says, well, did everybody know that you wanted to, have a nice, red cape when you were about 12 years old? And the magician's like, well, no, only family members knew that part. And then he mentions a gift when he was like really, really little that he basically just said, where basically it's one of those situations where only Santa would know that, and the magician realizes that, you are Santa. And Santa just says, well, now that you know that I'm Santa, I'm telling you right now that if you touch that hat, I will never give you another Christmas gift as long as you live. And the magician, of course, is just kind of begging. He's like, you mean no more trick cards, no more ribbons, no more anything like that? That's not fair. It's kind of one of those things where we kind of see the layers of the magician kind of get removed here. We're seeing him that he's still only human. He just talk about how he wants to be a great magician, and he knows that that hat is magical. And Santa goes into this dialogue basically saying, well, it doesn't give you the right to take away a life just because you want to benefit yourself. So it's kind of one of those situations where it is kind of another heartwarming moment where Santa talks to them about how important it is to embrace the fact that you can't always get your ways, but even on Christmas, the magician kind of realizes the errors of his ways, and he's like, all right, I understand that. I just want to still be the best magician. And we get that classic line of, now if you go home and you write down, I am sorry for what I did to Frosty 100 billion times. I know that in the movie it was a zillion times, but I'm trying to make it a little bit realistic. He basically says, then you might find something there. But in order for you to keep being on the good list, you must be able to learn how to do acts of random kindness. It always starts with something small. So I want you to apologize to Karen as well as Frosty for everything that you've done. And the magician at first, he's kind of hesitant, but then he's just like, all right, Karen, I'm sorry. And then he says to the snowman that, he's sorry. He goes to Hocus, and, this is one of those things where Santa didn't tell him to, do this, but it's one of those things where he still says, Hocus, I'm sorry for the way that I treated you. You don't deserve that. If you come home with me, I will promise that I will take better care of you, and I'll have a nice big juicy carrot waiting for you at home when you get back. And Hocus kind of hesitates, but as soon as he hears the carrot, he's like, okay. So we kind of build off on that. Then we see Santa put the hat on Frosty, and Frosty comes back to life. They all go back home. Santa even gives some gifts to some of the people that some of the characters that are going throughout the movie, like kids that are there, even giving money back to the nice train conductor, because it would be kind of cheesy if they gave him a toy. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like the money that he gave just did not even get affected at all. So that happens. We finally reach the end point in which Santa drops off Karen at her home. Frosty and Karen share one final goodbye hug, and Frosty says, "Don't worry, I'll be back again on Christmas Day." So they leave. Karen comes home. Her parents, they're back. They were so worried, and as soon as and it's kind of one of those things where they end on a very heartfelt deal. But we end the movie with Frosty coming back. They show another a couple more deals where they have a little bit of fun throughout the winter time, and even the magician even gets involved in this, and he has fun with that. So that's how we kind of have the movie end, and we have the movie also end with the song of Frosty the Snowman, and James Earl Jones just saying, "And you have a Merry Christmas too." Just having a really great moment, and again, it ends with the classic deal in which he basically just said, where it ends with the song, Frosty the Snowman had to hurry on his way, but he waved goodbye saying, "Don't you cry." He looks right at the camera, he smiles, and he says, "I'll be back on Christmas Day." And that's how the movie would end. So basically what you kind of see here is that I took basically the same story that was there, but I kind of expanded it a little bit more because it kind of deserved that. It kind of deserved that chance to expand and basically broaden the horizon just a little bit, because we established Karen as a character. We gave her a little more personality as well as a bit of a background that could be relatable to the story. Frosty gets some really good spots. The magician gets, a little bit of more evil doings than what he did in the actual movie. A little more fourth growth storylines. Just, this story is all about, being kind and being compassionate to others. And it does really help to give you, it really does, the acts of random kindness will never be, forgotten, and it won't be rewarded. You just have to give it time. So that's kind of what this movie is all about. So that is how I would book the Frosty the Snowman movie. How would you guys book Frosty the Snowman? How would you do it? Would you have it be a live action deal? Who would you have play Frosty? Who would you have play some of these characters? Like I said, I would love James Earl Jones to play the narrator, as well as Jim Carrey play the magician, so I think that would just be working out. So thank you guys so much for listening in on this edition of the 12 Days of Booking. Again, there's going to be a few more after this, and then it'll be waiting again until next year. So you know where to find me on Twitter. You know how to give us a like on our Facebook fan page. Thank you so much, you guys, and I will talk to you for the next rebooking. Bye-bye.